this is Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to put together this saddle, and when we're finished it should look something like this. I haven't brushed anything here, but it is now assembled, ready to move on to the breast collar and bridle and halter. So let's get started. Once the glue is dried on the saddle, we're going to cut that so there's just a little to go underneath. So I cut the ends off here and here, and I'm going to glue that under. Notice this piece and this, just leave that as it is for now. So from the back, you can see it like that. You want to make sure it's pulled nice and tight when you're gluing it. From the front, that's going to go under like that. And then these sides, we're going to be putting that down and trimming that off for the ribbon. But for now, we just want to get this glued under. Okay, so now we have tons of tassels. Well, maybe not enough, maybe enough. And we have started and determined how many tiers we're going to do. So now we're going to attach the fringes or tassels to the saddle pad. So when you're selecting your beads, the first thing you have to figure out is what needle you can use. Can you actually thread the needle? So there's these little teeny tiny needles. But if you use them so small, you're going to have to put your beads through the edge. So the needle has to be strong enough to pierce through here, small enough to go through the needle, and good enough that you can actually thread the needle. Now you can use the thread that is attached to your fringe or your tassel as it is now, or if you want to use smaller beads, you can use a Nymo beading thread, which you can get from a bead specialty store. And I'm going to put the information for the beads down below so you can see where I get mine stuff from. And this is a 000 or 000 thread. Now these are size 11 beads, and this is what I'm going to use. You could also use a 12 or a 15, which is a little bit smaller. Now, the smallest beads come in like this, are a 22 or a 24, which are absolutely ridiculously small. Also, when you're picking the order of your beads, remember you're going to have this ribbon here, and then check to see how those colors look against it. I like the darker green coming first and a blue in the middle there. So that's the order I'm going to choose. And I've gone to a smaller needle and smaller thread so that I can use my yellow bead. Now, if you're using just a single layer, you can add beads or not, put that on a needle, and then sew that in along here. If you're using multi-tier, the bottom one, you can keep this string on here and thread that, or you can cut the strings off all of them and use a different thread. Now, this is going to work the same if you use these strings or if you use a different thread. For me, I'm going to cut them off because I want to use smaller beads. Now on the back with pencil, I've marked for each of the beads where I want them to go. So that way when I start putting them on, I know where each one should be evenly. So now we're going to thread either this thread or about 11 inches of your beading thread onto a needle and put it through the first tassel if it's not already there. Then thread the second thread through the needle. Then add your beads. And I have mine written down in the order that I want them to go. I'm putting each one on to make sure it clears because not all the beads are going on my needle. So if it doesn't go on, then I'll switch to another bead. Then take your second tassel and run the needle up the middle, right up through the center. And at this point, you may want to use some pliers to save your fingers to take that through. You want the tassel to be just a tiny bit, either right at the length of that or a tiny bit above. And you want to make sure they're all the same. then either add a little glue or just scooch that needle through one more time through the side and coming back up through the center. Then string on some more beads. Once the beads are on, we're going to put it through from front to back, coming to where you marked it on the back. Again, I've been using this to save my fingers. Then you want to make sure that it's all at the same length as the others. Take the needle back from front to back again. Check everything's in the right place. Now this little part right here will have a ribbon on it. So you want your beads to be just below, and this will be glued on top of to hold it into place. However, at the back, we're going to take this and just run it through one of the previous stitches. You can do that with a needle, or I have a needle threader because my needle came off in that case. And work all the way around here and here with the doubles if you're using doubles or triples. And here I'm going to do the singles. If I start with red at the front here, I'm going to do the same going this way. And I would recommend not doing it standing like I am right now. I'm going to go find my spot, turn on a book, on Audible, and work my way around this. The biggest skill here you need is patience. There is the first half of my tassels applied. And you want to get them as close to possible as even. You may find that while you're doing this, you need to trim some down. Right now, I'm not really worried about how they fall, or the first this much of your ribbon is going to be glued on top of that to cover the strings you're seeing and to help hold it down. Underneath, you can also apply some, depending on what kind of thread you've used. And this thread that I'm using requires a little more on the back. So I'm going to continue with the other half. Here is the pad after I've just attached the fringes, tassels. And from the other side, for applying the trim, you have the option of putting a 45-degree angle on this and meeting it at each corner if you want, in other words, beveling it, or you can just go straight. So the first thing we're going to do is the piece across the front. And using whichever technique you want, we're going to glue that down right across from side to side. I'm just using Eileen's tacky glue for this, and I'm going to carefully, now you can apply it to the ribbon or the piece. It's just going to sit on the edge. Make sure you don't get glue on everything else. Make sure the ribbon comes right to the edge. Next, I'm going to fit a piece for these ends, these side pieces, or back piece, I mean. And again, either straight or cut on an angle. But make sure you don't go more than one ribbon's length across. So this one's going to be too big. Just cut it down a little and do that on both sides. And you might find just applying the glue directly to the ribbon easier, but you've got to be really careful not to get glue on everything. When you're doing the beads one like this, where there's beads, you want to make sure that the beads are even underneath the ribbon and that there is enough glue to help glue that thread down underneath that's holding the beads on. Now we're going to do the one across the back, and if you're beveling the edges, you're going to want them to meet up at each side. At this point, you may want to let that dry a little. Now we're going to take our saddle with the ribbon across. You want to be able to trim that excess leather so that there's only just a tiny bit, this much, to help glue it down. So on both sides, I'm going to trim most of this fabric off and check that I could put my ribbon across that without it showing. Now I've got 4 jump rings. These are the JR5S from Rio Rondo. And I am going to cut 4 pieces of ribbon between 1.5 inches and 2 inches. And I'm going to glue those one onto each of the 4 jump rings. Fold it in half, glue it down. Now I want to take 2 of these and glue them in the back of the saddle and 2 more at the front. So the ones at the back are for the saddle strings. The ones at the front are going to go a little closer together, and therefore your martingale strings or breastplate strings. And you can put them hidden in a little bit more or out fully, depending on how you want to be able to use them when you're attaching your breastplate. For the next ribbon, I'm going to go from here over to the back, making sure to cover these that have now dried. Then we're going to glue some across there to there, making sure to keep these well glued in and not get glue onto your tassels. Now this glue has to dry thoroughly before we do anything else, and you may find you need to poke it if it moves a little while it's drying to get it just at the edges and make sure nothing is stuck where it shouldn't be. I'm letting this dry on the models because I just want to make sure if anything's shifting that I keep everything in place and give it so it's fully dry. And again, the saddle is down here drying with the rings on it as well. Once this is dry, check your saddle to make sure where you want it to go, and run a piece of the ribbon across to make sure this is not going to stick below. Once you're happy with that, apply glue to the underside of the saddle and carefully place it where you want it. Make sure you know ahead of time, so you don't want to be moving it around. Make sure you have it centered and really press that down to get contact. Let that dry fully. If you do happen to get any free range glue, a damp toothpick will pick that off, or a damp Q-tip will pick that off for you. You can use your nails to push in this bottom part of the fabric just to make sure it's properly glued on. Another thing to be careful of is that the pad is far enough forward or back in the right position when you're placing the saddle. This stuff is very flexible that you make the saddle out of, so you have a lot of ability to move that around. This takes about half an hour to dry with the Eileen's glue. So the next thing we're going to do is put the piece of ribbon across here. We want it to butt up with this one, and we're going to roll it right over the edge here on the other side. I removed a little bit of glue with some dampened Q-tip and trying to get that as parallel as possible. Again, it depends on the shape of your saddle, and I was lucky enough to be able to line that up with this back piece right here, so it almost looks like it's one piece going across, and let that dry fully. If you are concerned about your thread on this side and you want to neaten it up, you can also just glue anywhere that this thread is more ribbon, and that's what I'm going to do for mine because I want to make sure this thread gets glued down. I'm using a toothpick to make sure, now that the glue is on there, that all the threads are first glued down before I put the ribbon on it, and that no tassels are in the way, and then I'll glue it on. I'm also using a different glue. It's a little stronger. Now you can see how much neater that is, and with that glue it will definitely hold those stitches in place now, and your tassels should be good. While those are drying, I'm going to do some more work with the saddle. I'm going to cut any strings off any of the tassels, And what I'm going to do is gluing just at the top. I am going to glue tassels in whatever order you want down the side. Now the number of tassels will depend on the size of your saddle. You're going to glue them down here, down there, and the same on the other side. Here are the fringes on both sides glued down. For your stirrups, you can use regular English stirrups or you can use something like this. And these are an old RDLC stirrup. They sell Arabian stirrups online. And because they used to ride either barefoot or just with sandals. So that was a flat pad for them to use. To tone down the silver a little, you can see the difference here. I've taken some sepia wash, which is just basically a watered down brown acrylic, and just painted it on I didn't do the inside, just on the outside to give it a bit of a toned down effect. When you're painting it, you could pool a little around the outside and then wipe the top off to give the stuff that sticks out a little more brightness. For the stirrup length, you can make them adjustable, or I've put a doll up here, and even though it's the classic doll, that would be about the height of a rider, maybe just a little shorter than a rider that would be in an Arabian. You can see that the stirrups are going to lie below the horse's belly. They're not going to be way up here, so you want them down here somewhere. By putting a rider on, this just allows me to see where the stirrups should actually be. So you can see they'd just be near the front. Before I attach my stirrups, I am going to put a jump ring on the top. And the reason for that is when I hang the stirrup, that way it'll hang facing out as opposed to like this, which doesn't look as pretty. So it's right there ready for the rider to put their foot in. Once you've got that closed, take a piece of ribbon or leather and thread that through. Now that the ribbon is glued on, I'm going to take this into the inside and glue that so that they hang as we saw on the horse. So a little bit more forward, and I'm going to cut that so it's about that long. If you wanted to do adjustable stirrups, then you could put a buckle in right in here. Now you can use a ruler to measure from there to the bottom of the stirrup and get it the same on both sides. And I'm keeping that so it doesn't glue my tassels down, and let that dry. I'm using Uhu glue for this, not a tacky glue, because I want it to be strong. These are heavy. Now at this point, I'm going to leave the saddle alone, let it dry fully. For the girth, it will not be adjustable. If you want to use it on multiple horses and the girth doesn't fit the way we do it, just make two. So the first thing you're going to need is some Velcro. And I'm going to get the soft, light, fluffy one, not the harder one, that goes onto the saddle, so it will be next to your horse and won't be rubby on him. So you're going to cut a piece about the distance from here to here, so about that much. Most of these have tape on the back and they just peel off. If not, glue it on. And we're going to put it on top of the stirrup near the front, like that. And there's going to be one on each side. And the one, this Velcro I have is very good for stickiness. But you may want to use extra glue depending on the kind of Velcro you have. That's that part of the girth. Now we have some 1/4 inch wide elastic. And this is great because it firms up on the horse. It's soft on it, doesn't hurt them. And what we're going to do is take the other side of the Velcro, and we just need a piece big enough to cover the end of the elastic. So now with the Velcro, I'm going to peel it off. The fluffy, so the harder side is facing down, and I'm just going to put my elastic on there. Now I'm going to take a piece of that thin leather, measure it the same size as this piece of Velcro, The side down is the coarse side of the Velcro that's going to stick. So I'm going to place a little glue on the top, and then take the leather, better side out, and glue that on top. Once that is dry, measure it on the model. Make sure you have a little bit of stretch when you're putting it on the model, but not too much. Then cut where you want it and do the exact same on the other side. Now, if possible, use elastic closer to the color of what you have. However, I can only purchase the one color here, so that's what I had to run with. And that's all that's involved in the girth. That's why you wouldn't want to make it adjustable. You just make more girths. Since I didn't like the white when it was on the horse, I am deciding to soak up a little bit of tea to dye that more of a natural color. You can see the big difference now that I've soaked it in tea for a few minutes and then rubbed it with a tea bag. Now it's just the color I wanted. For the saddle strings, I braided up a multicolored piece, twice the length I needed. Then I applied some fray check at the start, at the end, and at the middle. Then I'm going to cut where I put the fray check. Once it's fully dry. There will be 3 tassels on the end of each of those, but before I do that, I am going to put them through the rings. I used a little crochet hook to pull that through, doubled over. I'm going to even this ends out, even this part out, pass those 2 through, and pull. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. As there's going to be tassels on the end of these, the idea would be to have about the length so that the tassels and the beads hang at about the same length as the bottom tassels do. So I may trim that up just a little tiny bit so that it's below this first one, so that when these beads are on, it makes sense. If you're going to trim it, put a little bit more fray check on and cut it off. For the end of each saddle string, we're going to need 3 tassels. And what we want is only 1 thread coming out of the tassel. So on each one, we're going to cut off one side of the tassel, thread, and apply a little tiny bit of glue at the top just to make sure it doesn't come apart. On those single threads, thread the same beads pattern that you had for the rest of the saddle. Take that off the needle and do it for all 3 of them. Once I have the beads on those 3, I'm going to put all 3 of those on a larger needle. Since I don't have to worry about the beads anymore, it'll be easier to thread that way. Now with all 3 on there, I'm going to take one of the pieces, and now this should be firm because of the fray check, and I'm going to stitch that up and in, so that they're now attached. And I'm just going to put a second stitch in there. And I'm going to tie that off by putting my needle through a piece of thread and then back through this loop. And that causes a knot. And that's the way I did the other tassels as well. So when you look at those, they should be even at the end. Once I've shimmied those to where I want them and tightened it up, I'm then going to cut this off, leaving just a little tiny tail. And with a bit of glue, I'm going to glue that spot. And I'm going to get the same wrap color I used for the others. With your wrap color, we're going to tie a single knot in around this join down here, just above where it the end of it. And just like we did for the tassels, we're going to wrap. In this case, I'm going to do quite a bit more. Give it a good end piece to it. Then, just like the tassels, tie that. Then trim it. Apply the glue and roll it. That should come right down to the end.